All set.
Great. Good morning. This is the meeting for the Downtown Facility Special Committee. It's Tuesday, May 14th. It's 9:03 a.m. and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 legislators in attendance. I'm sorry, including Deborah, who is joining us via Zoom. Are there any changes to order? Changes to agenda, I'm sorry. No? Any comments from the public? Doesn't look like that. We're gonna, I don't really have a chair's report other than we did invite the DeWitt Historic District to join us to talk about the general district and their thoughts and concerns. And we're waiting for Susan Holland, I think. She's on her way. She's caught in traffic, which is not unusual in Ithaca. But that's all I have. The other thing that is on our list, I'm sorry, is discussion on placement of departments in the new Center of Government building. We're going to talk about that just to see what concerns there are for specific departments and to see if there's any major concerns or if it's just a concern over how the product or the building is being designed for access. Christine, do you mind getting started or without Susan? Or? So,
sure.
Joining us, Christine, what's your last name again?
Christine O'Malley, and I'm Preservation Services Director at Historic Ithaca. So I deal with a lot of property owners and all the cultural resource management issues in the county. So
the building we're proposing to build is smack in the middle of the DeWitt Historic District. We have 3 buildings currently in that district, all slated to be removed if we're allowed to do that or if there's a concern for doing that. But we want to make sure we understand any concerns that there are for the historic district. And how we can manage those and how we can build the best building that fits in the district. So Christine, I'll let you kind of jump in.
Sure.
And just kind of talk a little bit about the district itself maybe.
Yeah, I thought what I would do is just sort of back up a little bit to give people an understanding of the regulatory context and the federal context for what we call the National Register districts. So as some of you know, in 1966, the federal government created the National Historic Preservation Act. That established the system that we know today that operates under the National Park Service, which is the National Register of Historic Places, and all issues really to do with historic preservation. So that was 1966. So Ithaca was really sort of in the vanguard and getting on board with looking at historic districts and creating National Register properties. So in 1971, the DeWitt Park Historic District was created and designated. So that was pretty early on. And it was listed on the New York State Register, which is separate from the National Register. It was also listed on the National Register of Historic Places and was also created as the very first local historic district. So Ithaca, in this early period, actually set up a preservation ordinance system. And that meant that they would be able to locally designate properties. So there's 3 levels: local designation, state, and National Register. And so we went back into the files to see the form for the DeWitt Park Historic District, and it's pretty brief because this is early days when it was designated in 1971. So whenever there's a National Register or local historic district created, that usually refers to a group of buildings in a neighborhood or block or area. So that's exactly what we have here. There's a map and a boundary. And what they also do when you establish a local historic district or National Register Historic District is you create what's called a statement of significance. And that's usually about a page and a half long. And it gives a period of significance, so actual dates, saying, properties from this date to this date are what constitute the historic district, the period of significance. So for DeWitt Park, that's 1820 until 1930, because there's a whole interesting range of buildings within the DeWitt Park Historic District: religious, private, institutional, representing a variety of styles, relating to different significant episodes in Ithaca's history. So that's what's called a period of significance and a summary significance statement. When you have a historic district created, so imagine it's 1971, the historic district here is being created, there are buildings already existing that were built after 1930, so after the period of significance. So those buildings get labeled as non-contributing, that's the term. But it's not like they were removed from the district, because when you create a historic district, you're not going to go around to the building that was built in 1960 and say, okay, tear it down, can't be part of this district. And, you know, that's not how land use planning works. So those buildings remain, and they just become labeled as non-contributing. So that's the case with 300 and 308. They were labeled as non-contributing because they were outside the period of significance, but they're still part of the historic district. So I know it seems a little confusing, but they're still there. You know, we're not erasing them. And what's interesting is, in looking at the form from 1971 that we pulled up from the system, is that they noted, so the former public library that was still standing, they said, you know, most of the architecture is predominantly 19th and early 20th century, eclectic mix. However, the public library, so this is the old public library, and the Ithaca Savings and Loan Association building, which was the Key Bank building, are two noteworthy contemporary buildings carefully designed to contribute to the existing environment. So they actually, you know, called out some of the modern buildings in this form. And that's because when they were doing the district, they looked at any of the modern buildings and sort of took note of them. And if you think about the buildings that we're looking at on Tioga Street, they're not of a size or scale that overwhelms the historic buildings. They were only two-story buildings, so they weren't detracting in any way, really, from the district. You know, they weren't 10-story, huge, you know, apartment buildings or anything like that. So they saw them as fitting in, you know, to the context. So that's sort of the background element. So Susan, if you wanted to add in anything else, it's just sort of explaining how summary statement of significance works in general historic districts.
I'm glad you did that, Christine. I'm sorry I'm so late. 79 was backed up for many, many minutes, and I can't really get to work these days between the construction going on there, so I live in Brooktondale. So no, I think Christine covered it really well. I guess the question was, you know, how does the historic district work? But I guess you could ask some questions. Again, I don't know if Christine said, but in 1966, the National Preservation Act was established in the United States. You did say that? Okay. Yeah. So we're really early. We did a great job here. So we're just, you know, wanting to continue to do that great job.
And the other thing about DeWitt Park, because it was such an early district, it was expanded in 1976 and again in 1979. And it's a very quirky district, and I went back to my state colleagues to talk about it, in the sense that the local boundary is one element, but then the local district takes up one boundary, but then the National Register district is a bit of another boundary. That's why we have the kind of unusual situation of the Red House, which you recently sold, as being outside of one of those boundaries. Okay, so they didn't exactly match up. And that's actually something that we're trying to rectify so that the boundary is the same, because administratively it's just kind of crazy to have two different boundaries. So trying to make the boundaries the same.
Yeah, I don't know if Christine talked about also when a building, and you do take state funds, which state and federal funds, I do hope that you do, especially doing the energy, I guess starting with the energy feasibility study, there should be more money coming, at least with the Inflation Reduction Act, the state, we're hearing some things. I know the city's been able to grab some money for some of the initiatives that they do have, but there would be a review for y'all to take that money, and are you in a historic district? It also appears triggers as a question when you're doing the State Environmental Quality Review Act. If you look at the documentation when you pass the short, I think it was a short form that you did for the project itself, you check off that you are in a historic district. So that kind of triggers the land use and planning rules as well. There was another note, yeah. And then I do know that when the convention center, the conference center was built, the Ithaca Downtown Conference Center was built, there was a question. That is adjacent to a historic district, to the National Register of the Downtown District, and they did have a review because they took Empire State Development Funds, I call it ESD funds. So they did have a review by the SHPO when they were building, just to make sure there was no issues and things like that. So there was definitely review, and I'm having lunch with Suzanne Jablonski, who's probably in charge of that, and I'll ask her for more information, but I do know that that was asked as well, so, yeah.
Are there any questions at this point? Yes, Mike.
Thanks for coming out. What official authority does Historic Ithaca have with respect to the DeWitt Historical District?
We don't. We're not the regulators of the district. So the district is, as I said, a local, state, and national register district. So locally, any local historic district is supervised by the City of Ithaca under the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission and their regulations. And then state and national register districts, the state would come in, as Susan said, if you were taking state money within that district to do a project. So you have two buildings here that are going to be removed for the new center of government, but the new center of government is being constructed within the boundaries of this historic district. So it has an impact on the historic district. So, you know, as Susan said, if you're going to receive state funding or federal pass-through funding, then SHPO would be involved, the State Historic Preservation Office.
So Historic Ithaca is just an educational outreach group and lobby, is that right?
We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we do education, outreach, advocacy, and training for people. We don't have the regulatory supervision that the city government or the state government or the federal government has.
Can you describe that regulatory supervision locally? I know there's the Landmarks Preservation Board.
Yes, so the City of Ithaca has a preservation ordinance, 228, and that's what Brian McCracken, who's a city's preservation planner, works with. So any of the over 600 properties that are either in a local historic preservation district or individually listed in the City of Ithaca, Brian works with those property owners whenever an exterior change is being made. If it's a substantial change, it goes before the ILPC at their monthly meeting. A lot of changes he just approves at staff level. It's a very high percentage, in fact. So he works with property owners to make it not a burdensome process, but to make sure that they're following what's established in the Secretary of Interior standards. So every single community in New York State that has a preservation ordinance is considered a certified local government, and they're all following the Secretary of Interior standards established by the National Park Services for historic preservation.
Thank you.
Rich, did you have a comment? Or?
I think Deborah was ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deborah, I didn't see you. Thank you.
That's all right. I remain confused, and I'm afraid that we got this process off a couple of years ago on the wrong foot because someone somewhere slapped together a very modern drawing of a proposed building that would wrap around that corner of Tioga and Buffalo, I think. But I'm trying to understand the status of these non-contributing structures. You mentioned, Christine, that they are still mentioned in the statement of significance as non-contributing but noteworthy. And I'm trying to understand, and you're probably not the right person to ask at the end of the day, because as I understand it now, we have to ask the City of Ithaca what we can do with those buildings. Is that correct?
Because they're in a local historic district, typically you do. So if you all remember when the old library site was being redeveloped, and so the old library was being removed, and the new design did go through ILPC review, and I know there's a whole discussion about, sovereignty, of course, for the county, but there was a review advisory, I believe it was at the time, of that new design before it was built.
I would note that that building, as it is built now, is considerably less congruent with the historic district than anything that I think this committee would be proposing at the end of the day. So I'm just trying to understand, it's not that you can't replace those buildings.
Yeah.
They just have to be designed in a way that's consistent with the character of the district.
Yeah, they're looking for compatibility. So if you all came in and said you wanted to put a 20-story building, right, on the corner,
Not going to happen.
not going to happen, right? So, it's within reason, and it's not to say that you can't build a building with modern materials, but they're looking, for scale and massing compatibility, and choice of materials and things like that. So that's really what the issue is. It's not saying that you need to build an exact replica, for example, of the county courthouse right beside it. That's not what it's about. It's larger design issues of scale, massing, material choice, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Rich?
Yeah, thank you. I guess I'll make some comments, and first I'll put out my defensive shield, and that I'm a past president of Historic Ithaca. Mm-hmm. I think I've got some street cred in this area. I find the discussion of the potential bureaucratic delays here alarming, and I'd ask for assistance in understanding how do we make this thing go? Because having watched, say, the old library, the new library place project, and the 8 trips they made to landmarks preservation, that's scary to me. There's real financial implications of this. There's impacts on our county government. And when you add in the layer of New York State as some opaque organization that, I don't want to treat New York State as a monolith, but we can't dredge our inlet. And it's the DEC trying to get agreement within the DEC to do it. They are capable of tremendous delay, and that's what scares me. Is this different, and what do we do?
Yeah, I think, Library Place was I'm not going to, go over that story, but it was also planning board. There were a number of delays at planning board and zoning. So there were other areas where it got stuck. But I would say the state, with the SHPO, when we had a discussion with them, they really will review things in an expedient manner, for projects like this. They're not trying to.
You had the word if in there.
Well, you have to have a project to review, right? So right now, there's no drawing for a new building, right? So they can't even look at anything. Right?
Yeah.
So we got to, we have to think about the critical path of design, right? So we're talking about a new center of government.
But if we can't know that they're going to say you can take down the Key Bank building, you've already got a roadblock.
Can I just say, I'm from Albany. I don't know how many of you know that, but I worked in Albany for 12 years plus, actually more like 25. And so there's a lot of people there who want to know about our projects. And most of the people who do work at SHPO are preservationists, they're trained preservationists, and they know what makes a good project. So it's great to bring them in at the beginning so that, let's say we didn't, let's say there's no communication, all of a sudden it's plopped on their desk and they haven't seen it for 2 years. years. And they're like, what is this? So at the beginning, you can have conversations with them. I can tell you from doing the boathouse project, which I just did, which is a little bit different, but we had to have a review because we had a lot of change orders, because when you're doing an old building, sometimes, you know, you find things. And it was a city project, so there's a lot of layers. And literally the change orders were reviewed, I would say, within a couple days. So it was really fast. They knew we had to do the work. They were churning them out. And honestly, at some points we can make phone calls. I know I sound like a real Albany bureaucrat, but we can make phone calls and just be like, where is it on your desk? We need it now. So, you know, I think we have that up because they know about it already. So already they know that there's going to be a project. They're excited about it. And it's cool to work on a design in a historic district, a new building.
I'll also say, you know, a lot matters in terms of the design team that you select and their experience in working in communities with historic buildings or with historic districts. And in the draft that I saw Arel had prepared, you know, he called that out in his request for qualifications, that they were looking for people with this sort of experience. So when you hire a design firm that knows that, they know how to work all those levers, and they know what's needed and what documentation they have to prepare to get through those state agencies. So I'd say that's really a critical part of the team that you're hiring, that they're well aware of that they're designing a building in a historic district, and that X, Y, and Z issues might come up and they have to address them with the state.
You answered most of my question, but how do we take those buildings down in the time frame we've determined we really want to do that, like now?
You have to follow the process, right? I mean, you have to.
But without having
informed.
a full design of the new building, it sounds like they may sit on their hands.
Well, you know, I'm not going to speak for the state or.
And you shouldn't.
Right. You know, that's not my role. But I think, you know, in land use and planning, you know, the best practices are that you don't take down until you know what's going there, right? That's. You know, that's how most municipalities operate, because people don't want to run into a situation where something comes down and you have a parking lot or a blank space.
I'm eternal.
For time, you know, sometimes there are unforeseen delays like COVID, but sometimes, you know, something comes down and whatever happens to cause a delay, it could last for decades. So most communities, and I don't, again, want to speak for everybody, try to avoid that in their land use and planning guidelines. So
I don't see any delays right now in our timeline, but that could change, obviously. But Megan's here, and she's been in contact, and we submitted documentation to the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO. Mm-hmm. And if she wouldn't mind giving a quick update on where we are, submitting stuff to them, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, and I think, as was just mentioned, our process is maybe a little less linear than is typical, and so, you know, I think typically the SHPO is used to working when we, you know, the applicant already has a team in place. We already know what state or federal agencies might be involved in the project in some level, and, you know, not complete designs, but we have, you know, kind of at least the rough, you know, design, like, and those sorts of things. After a conversation with their staff, you know, they want to be nothing but helpful. I will say everybody's been very professional and very responsive so far. And so they recommended, even though we don't have all the information they're going to ultimately need, let's just start the consultation process. And, you know, they prefer to talk early and make sure that there aren't unforeseen surprises down the road. So what I was able to submit, it was a little complicated because we don't have some of the things, you know, that they would normally review, but making it clear, you know, providing them all the information on the 3 buildings we would anticipate taking down, since we're also contemplating removing the 128 East Buffalo Building C. structure as well. And so that they've got the information on those buildings, that they can, understand that our intention would be to remove them, so they can already start contemplating that, and including the entire project area, including DeWitt Park. I tried to highlight with them that we're looking at geothermal, and that this would not just be a benefit to the county, but to other historic buildings that are our neighbors, and probably provide important information that could benefit pretty much any project in the flats of the city, since it will hopefully yield some, geologic information and such. And they were immediately responsive. I've already, saw them, kind of notify an archaeologist, just because we wanted to make sure there are no surprises on that front if we're drilling a test well in DeWitt Park. But needing to do these things because they recognize if, say, the exploratory well works well, and we want to go forward with a system, we will likely want NYSERDA or other funds involved. And if that agency then contacts them after we've already started doing things like ground disturbance, it can cause problems. And so this is helping their fellow agencies make sure that they don't encounter issues down the road if we pursue funding or other participation from them.
Yep. Thank you, Megan. Susan was next.
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. When you talk about library buildings, there was the original Ezra Cornell Library that was where CFCU is. It's now the City Seal, the building on that. You're talking about the 1967. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understand. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mike, did you have a comment, question?
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to mention. One, the process was different with the old library site than we're talking here, because what the county did was sell that site to a developer. The developer had to do the processing through the Landmarks Preservation Commission, for example. That wasn't them, it wasn't the county's application, for example. The other thing, I find it real troubling to say that, we're not supposed to take down a building until we're ready to build another one. We aren't talking about the 1960s urban renewal where you just take down a block and see what you can do. We know what we're going to do. And I think taking it down, even if it left a blank spot for a couple of years, is preferable to having two derelict buildings, which are the subject to ridiculous graffiti, which we see on a regular basis on these buildings.
Any other questions for Rich?
I don't want to talk too much, but I'll make the comment that, we don't want empty lots. And I was here in the 60s and 70s when the Center Ithaca space was left empty for a very long time, created a hole in our downtown, and had real bad impacts. With that said, everything Mike just said about, we know what we're going to do, but this fear of an empty lot for some period of time also works against trying to do any kind of deconstruction in a rational way, because you delay being able to do deconstruction until you finally get that approval, and then your time space is really constricted. If we truly believe in a circular economy, which we should, and we should be going, I feel, full bore on deconstruction, I think New York State has to rethink this. Easy to say, hard to get them to do, but I just think they're wrong. If they think that the great fear here is an empty lot, that's just not the case. It's doing it right. And we need this time, while everything's sitting there with nothing happening, to begin doing it and doing it right.
I think, just to respond to that, yes, I think you have good intentions, as the county wanting to do deconstruction, all these things. The fact of the matter is still, though, that in the process that Megan outlined, they still need a drawing of the building to respond to and approve and look at. So there still are steps that you must follow, right? Like, can't put the cart before, et cetera.
I guess I'm saying they should trust us at least a little bit, and they won't.
Well,
I mean, a lot happens when there's trust.
You can't become the exceptions to the rule. Do you understand what I'm saying in terms of, the county has regulations, right, that they expect people to follow step by step.
And we should follow them in the construction of the building. It's just the way they've set up this process, we sit on our hands, and it makes deconstruction harder.
Well, okay.
Can I ask a question? Just as a question, and this is the $1 million question, but I think it's it's probably tens of millions of dollars. Is all the money in place already? Do you feel like, I know, well, we had conversations about, there's a lot of, I guess, people are strapped for things and strapped for that. And I know that, I feel like the state has some money. I know like in the arts, we just got $50,000 to do our roof, free money. I won't take free money. I have to do some things to get it. But, the arts got a lot of money. And so I'm wondering how the state is looking and some of the federal money that should be coming. And just thinking about that and thinking about, the county's budget. And I know you can bond for it and do all of that stuff too. But I know also doing a construction project, I'm always worried when I do a grant application and then, 6 months later, a year later, when I'm finally getting ready to get the bids out, the costs are exorbitant. We used to do 20%, contingency, and it seems like it's higher now. So I'm just wondering what that looks like in the scheme of things, and hope we can reach that also. So that's just from a experiential, I guess, perspective over almost 30 years of working in preservation and community development, so.
Lisa, do you want to respond to that quickly?
Sure. So the funding, we do have funding in place through our 5-year capital plan to fund the building with a combination of county's fund balance, the expectation that the building will be eligible for some sort of federal and state funding, and the balance being bonding.
Thank you. Veronica, do you have a question?
Not a question, just commenting what I'm hearing on this discussion about trusting the state and working with the state. It sounds like the promising type of avenue right now is like what Megan, you described, just talking to the state office and telling them our concerns, instead of trying to predict how the process is going to be and what exceptions we can and can't get from here where they're not here in this conversation. And I appreciate everyone with all the wisdom from all sides sharing the process, or sharing what you know, because I have learned a lot.
I think there's no doubt that we would hope to get some state funding. And this is a process we need to go through for that. They have to check that box off, I would imagine. But I feel optimistic about our conversations with SHPOs, and let's hope that works correctly. But I think that our timeline is still working. We have RFPs out now for, RFQs for architects, so it's going to take a bit of time to do that. But I agree that removing those buildings is high on our list of things to do, and the more time we have, the better we can do it. But I have a question for you folks. So the county has 3 buildings currently that are not going to be removed. This building, the old jail, and the courthouse. And this building and the old jail must have gone through this process before. How did that work? And going to credibility, it seems like things worked out pretty well, and I just wanted to see what your thoughts were.
Well, this is an award winner, I know that, and it was before, I think, both of our time, correct? At our office. We can ask. I don't know. Do you know?
I wasn't here when these projects were done, but I think it's a good question to ask. I mean, Megan can ask the state, how did that process happen, and et cetera. Yeah.
But the changes on those 2 buildings were not external. There's, I think, a big difference between modifications that you make externally and modifications that you make to the interior. So that could be a difference that makes whatever happened with these buildings not predictive.
Mike?
Yeah, Deborah's right, and there was no process. I can't speak of actual knowledge of the old jail project. That was just about done when I came on. But as far as what we did here, We just did a renovation, interior renovation, and we just did it, and we paid for it ourselves.
Annie?
Yeah, I think definitely what we're hearing is that we need really good communication with the state and SHPO, and we can't, I think the earlier the better. I mean, we've already initiated it and keep going. I'm hearing that that's really important for the ongoing process and the relationship with the state, and also information back and forth. That's going to help us to really have I'd call it a better project. And we're really lucky to have folks here that can help, guide us with some information and education and the relationships with Albany. So I'm very hopeful.
I do have a direct question for you. The buildings that we have, the 3 buildings here, are non-contributing. Do you have any concerns of them being removed?
Of this building here?
No, of the 3 buildings they're proposing to remove. Are there any concerns that you feel those buildings should be preserved?
I think that, the 300 North Tioga building is going to be difficult because that building is very solidly built. So that's not an easy deconstruction. It has a very solid concrete basement. It has stair towers that were built out of concrete. It's steel exterior. So taking that apart would take some time. But again, I think this is when your design team, once they're hired, looking at the existing buildings, might have some insight into how to deal with that. Whether it's incorporating some elements of that building in your new building, or removing things and putting them back in, or just taking them out altogether. But that's when, the architects and engineers from that design team could have a lot of valuable input going forward.
So if there's one building you're concerned about, it's that one. It's the old Key Bank building.
I would say from a construction point of view, and the way it sits in the corner, I think it's a building that actually could be incorporated into the new design. That's my personal opinion, so I'm speaking, from that perspective. Another design team might say, no, we don't want to make that a corner pavilion and add it into the building. But I could see, because of the way it's built, it could actually become part of your new center of government design and still hold that corner. It's extremely well built. I've been through it with somebody from facilities.
Yeah, we all took a tour of that building as well.
Yeah, exactly.
More than once.
We're surprised.
Was that your question, though, Randy?
That kind of answered my question. So yeah, I think that was the question I had is your opinion on it, and your opinion is that maybe that one has value.
It does. I mean, the 308 building has value as well, but I understand the complications in retaining it. My opinion looking at 308 is you have an exceptional metal screen on the front. If it could be removed and detached and used somehow in the new design in an atrium or something, that would be fantastic. From a perspective of preservation and sustainability, you never want to see a building come down, because the greenest building is the one that's already built, right? So you're removing a lot of embodied carbon anytime you remove a building. So you're always looking at the elements of the building and thinking, well, what could be taken out? What could be kept? What could be used again? That's just, a perspective of preservation.
We do have the drawings for the professional building in our office, actually. We were, the former owner gave them to us so we could look, not Ed, actually, the designer, the developer, the original developer. So we do have those. They're pretty fascinating, actually, and beautiful. But yeah, I agree with what Christine says, so yes. And Building C, I just wanted to say one thing about Building C. This is how we got involved in the first place. I don't know if everyone knows here, but we helped to save the Boardman House because that was the last remaining building of Ithaca College. So actually, I think Building C was also built then, but it was not a premier building then. And I would say it's probably not now, but again, it's, it's there. But we were worried about the Boardman House. And when it was saved, they they had 3,400 signatures saving that building back in the 60s and without social media. So we were kind of concerned about if a new building was that close to Boardman House, like what would happen, and kind of looking at the two buildings and how they interact now. There's some issues there already. So that's how we started working with the owners there and just kind of getting some information. I think Rich was with us at some point with them a long time. It feels like a long time ago. So here we are today. So that was how we got started. So that would be another thing, not to necessarily obviously keep them, but to also think about what would that do to a brownstone building that's that's sitting there at the moment. So, and will stay.
Yes, Mike?
Of course, Building C was the original library for Ithaca College downtown. It was a one-story building. And then it was enlarged by Ithaca College to add the studio for the TV program on top. And so that is an original Ithaca College building going back to probably the 50s, I'm guessing. But as far as the building on the corner, the old bank building, I think that the train has left the station on that one, because when the Facilities and Infrastructure Committee wanted to take time and review that building as to whether there would be a possible use for it, the majority of the committee at that time bypassed that with a resolution that it wanted to go forward directly with the Center of Government building. And Randy, you remember that. And so we never got a chance to look at that building carefully. The idea of incorporating it into a new building is very, very difficult for me to understand why we'd want to do that. But I think the decision has been made by the legislature to take them both down.
Greg?
Yeah, I feel like this will be a grenade that doesn't go well, but I just want to do a sanity check to see, am I the only one that is starting to think that we could probably spend half the time and half the money at a different location, maybe up by the mall or somewhere with like an adaptive reuse? I know that SHPO has sailed, but I'm just wondering if anybody else is thinking that, gosh, maybe we could do a lot more for a lot less in a spot that didn't have the unique, complex challenges that we're facing here. Not that they're not worthy or need to be taken on, but is it really something that in this process where we're trying to provide adequate office space and adequate public access, is it really necessary, and how much additional is this adding to the costs? I think is a conversation that we really haven't had. I don't know how the committee can do something though, Mike, too, if the majority of the committee, or the committee wants something, if the majority of the committee moved to have something else, that those statements were in conflict. It seemed like there were some members of the committee that wanted to spend more time, but the majority of the committee moved that forward. So I guess, I don't know, I'm just sitting here and this is all great information. It's fascinating, but it's also very challenging to understand that this site will create and the additional burdens that it will pose on our taxpayers, because that will come in the form of cost. And is the cost worth the proximity to 2 or 3 other buildings that we occupy that don't even really hold anywhere near a significant number of our county staff? So just throwing that one out there again, because this seems like it's going to be a long, laborious process. And I think that's a big waste of money. So just going to throw that out there.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Deborah's online.
Deborah?
Yeah, I'll fall on that grenade. I think that we as a committee have bent over backwards. We as a county have bent over backwards to accommodate the concerns about historic district buildings that are actually contributing buildings. And I appreciate the lens through which Historic Ithaca looks at these non-contributing buildings. But that's not the only lens that we need to be looking at. We have now divested ourselves of the Red House. We're not proposing to deconstruct any contributing building. We can try to deconstruct sustainably, responsibly, and we can design a building that fits into the district. But at the end of the day, we also have to look through the lens of cost and do what's reasonable from a fiscal perspective. And that may not be what Historic Ithaca would consider the best and most sustainable practice. I understand there are people who don't want to tear down any building, but those buildings are not functional for us. And at the end of the day, we want to build a functional center of government that fits in and is congruent with the historic district. But it may not be something that incorporates the grill from the front of the professional building. And insofar as the fact that the bank building may have been constructed with very solid stair towers, at the end of the day, what we saw when we toured that building is that the windows are falling apart. So, you know, I think that we have to walk a line here. We've been as accommodating as we can be of the historic concerns, and will continue to be accommodating of those concerns in terms of design. But I'm not going to run away with my tail between the legs after everything that we've invested in these buildings to have a center of government that's centrally and conveniently located for all of our residents and all of our employees.
Thank you, Deborah. Yes, Meg?
Just a word about process. I know later on the agenda, we're going to be talking about the RFQ and, you know, getting our, you know, team on board. So I do think there will be, you know, in terms of with this site, we've started consultation. It will stay open so that we can add information as we get it for the new building, where our test wells for geothermal will be, et cetera. So the whole, you know, idea, and part of what feels like inflexibility perhaps from our perspective, from the state's perspective, they recognize they play a role with all of their fellow agencies at the state and federal level. So down the road, if we hopefully get state funding and perhaps even federal funding, we will already have been in this process. So those agencies, that work is kind of done for them on a level if we've, you know, kind of gotten all the information that the state needs. So it's not necessarily repeating things. It's something that would have been triggered if, for example, say we got a congressional appropriation or DOE money or NYSERDA money. So I think from that perspective, the SHPO's office is, you know, trying to keep us moving along at the same time that they ultimately do need to know more information than we just happen to have at this particular moment.
Thank you. Rich, did you have a comment?
I did. I'm not at Greg's position yet. I'm not ready to throw grenades. But I hesitate because we would be taking the center out of the center of government. And I think it really needs to be here and have presence here. With that said, if the train wreck that is quite possible starts to happen, I think we do need to be flexible and just give it up. Say, you know, this would be the best place to put it, but if New York State and whatever can't help us do it, and we could do it much cheaper somewhere else, yeah. And that would be really unfortunate, but I'm not there yet.
I agree with Rich on that, but I think this is a process we have to go through, and we're going through step by step by step, and part of this is to identify the steps, right, that we need to go through. We ultimately might get to this point and go, you know, well, you're right. It doesn't make sense to build it here because it's going to be twice as expensive, and we're not getting any funding from anybody, you know, and it would have been a waste of time for us in a way. But also, I think that we need to do a due diligence here. and that's what we're doing. So, any other questions for Christine or Susan?
Randy, if I could just add, just to follow up on what you said, at this stage, you don't know the costs of everything. So this is, why I think it's good to be methodical. I understand that everybody wants to move and get a new center of government. I understand that, but I think, asking these questions and finding out the costs, maybe it turns up that as adaptive reuse up at the mall, as Greg pointed out, might be cheaper in the long run. But these are all unknowns, and you don't know until you go through the design process and the request for qualifications, et cetera. So,
I have one more question. Is there any concern on the height of the building?
That's going to be up to, the review of your zoning laws and what's permissible in that area. And Megan can probably speak to that better in terms of planning perspective.
We had originally started, the original seeker was done, kind of with a maximum building envelopes, which I believe was about 65,000 square feet total, and no more than 5 stories was the original, kind of thought process. But I will say, that seeker form does talk about, working with the preservation professionals and, thinking about the context we have. There are some large buildings, in the district and adjacent to the district. If you think about like the Hugo Apartments, as well as the courthouse, churches, et cetera. So I think that is part of where the SHPO's office is trying to be helpful, recognizing that we're very early in. So like when we have our project team on board, who hopefully also have some experience, as we're asking in our RFQ with the preservation side of things, that we can look at the district and think about those things like, the massing and materials and things that generally historic preservation is not trying to create new fake buildings that look artificially historic. It's recognizing, new buildings are coming into a historic district, but that they're not overwhelming, kind of the character of what's already there. So I think that's where the, kind of talking with one another, we can avoid wasting, a lot of time and money on multiple designs that I think we've seen, happen to other projects without consultation early in the process, so that we're all kind of going generally in the same direction together. And so, that time and money we're spending on our designs is informed by what we've already heard, so that we're not accidentally proposing, a crazy roof design or something that would be considered really incongruous.
All right, I think that we greatly appreciate Christine and Susan joining us, and it was very helpful, and I'm sure we'll speak again.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
But
Appreciate
any
it.
input you have as the process goes, we appreciate it.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. And good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. The next discussion was about placement of departments in the center government building. Some concerns came up. I know that Shauna expressed concern about the Office of Aging, but I want to open this up for discussion. We have quite a few buildings that have been targeted to go into the new building, and the planning and sustainability office is planning to go into the old jail. But I didn't know if anybody had any comments or concerns that they would like to talk about, any departments that you think should be focused on. We'll go with Annie first.
Yeah, I'd like to hear possibly from Lisa Holmes that, if we're hearing anything from those, that department, COFA, or other departments first. So any information that would be helpful to us versus, because I haven't really heard a lot.
Sure. So in the process, the concerns that were expressed by Lisa Monroe in the Office for the Aging had to do with overall accessibility and wayfinding in the building for older adults. Right now, it's pretty straightforward because they're on the first floor. You walk in and it's pretty easily accessible, easy to find. They're in close proximity to the Human Services building and close to one of the bus routes. So it's more or less questions around accessibility and wayfinding for those clients. And so, in relation to the overall placement in the building.
Mike?
I think Lisa has hit on what I was going to say. It's for elderly people, they're not going to come down here and park in a parking ramp. They already don't come down to the Commons because it's too hard for them to negotiate to get there. If we're going to have an office like the Office for the Aging, and there may be others that need access by our elderly population, which is only going to grow, they need to have a place to park. And I know people say, well, you know, they could park in the parking ramp on Seneca Street. They won't. They just won't come. And so I think we need to think about that.
Ms. Veronica?
Deborah had her hand up first.
I'm sorry, Deborah. Yell right out.
That's okay. Thanks, Veronica. No, I just want to say that a couple of times I've had to go to meetings or events at that current COFA location, and I didn't find the parking easy to negotiate at all. In fact, once I got a ticket. So I'm not in any way trying to detract from concerns about there being adequate parking, not just for COFA users, but every citizen who needs to access the building. But let's not pat ourselves on the back. It ain't easy parking down by COFA where it is now.
Rebecca?
I agree that it's important to have parking for people who need to come by car to an office and park. That is critical, because while I think there are always going to be people visiting who can't park in a parking garage and walk however far, that's like a big hurdle for a bunch of people. There's also many people for whom it is not a big hurdle, and I think we have to have other transportation solutions that don't involve just parking, because parking takes a lot of, even setting aside like vehicle miles traveled emissions stuff, although maybe we'll all be in electric robot cars in the future. Parking takes a lot of space, and so like the more parking you make, also the farther and farther things get apart, and it doesn't form a sustainable solution, at least not if you want a downtown or to keep a downtown that is anything that could be called a downtown. So I think it is important to have like some parking spots at locations. Like I know people who, for various reasons, like car is the only place they could get anywhere, even if coming with the place from, like even if they're coming like from within the city to the city. But I think this is only going to work if we also have some other forms of transportation. Like some people are going to bike instead of drive a car. We need bike racks. Some people can walk from further away. I think it would be great to have a park and ride and shuttle situation. Is that going to be our thing? Is that going to be with TCAT? I don't know how that would look, but like, I just don't think it's possible to have parking be the only solution. Maybe if we start building like underground tunnels and parking garages and stuff, but I'm told that's very expensive, and I'm told that we don't want to spend millions and millions and millions more dollars than we have to.
Greg?
Yeah, we keep coming back to this parking conversation, and there's really not a lot of room in the true center for parking. So if parking's going to be a priority for staff that don't live in downtown Ithaca, right, the 700 plus staff we have that work in the county, and for the other 70,000 residents we have in the county that don't live in the city of Ithaca, I don't know, just same grenade, different part of the meeting. You know, I think we really have to ask ourselves if it's truly inaccessible in some way for staff and many of our population. I mean, we've heard from people from Mike's district and Lee's district who really don't ever seem to want to venture down here into the great unknown of the city of Ithaca. So I think we need to, while we're at this point in the juncture, we need to really make sure that this is what we're committed to, and then we need to be open to creative solutions that address these things. And surface parking is not popular, but we need to have an accessible building. We're not building something to be inaccessible to those that we serve, both our staff and our residents.
Annie, then Veronica.
So my hearing of the concerns for the Office for the Aging, and I've heard some concerns from some other departments too, I think it's doable. I think we could have this is a compromise in, for instance, talking with a lot of folks in the district I represent, driving downtown, sure, is difficult, but hearing from people that are downtown and that maybe don't have a car or they don't want to get into their car, so to be able to walk or take a bus to our services, it's very easy. But so folks from my district, if they don't want to drive downtown, do they necessarily want to drive all the way, for instance, through Ithaca, through Route 13, all the different lights and one-ways? That's confusing for them to go, I'm just saying, to Lansing, where there's more land, or to Trumansburg from Lansing or Groton. So I think, to me, this feels like a pretty good compromise, being downtown and being adjacent to our other offices. When I'm talking to folks, they'll talk about, well, then I can go to the clerk, as long as it's near the clerk's office, because I often have to go to the clerk's office because I need this form. I need to go to and pick up the forms at the Board of Elections for, to register or to change my registration or for an absentee ballot. So having these things close together, I think, are going to be really important. Wayfinding is going to be a huge thing. Are we going to deduce, I think, really listening to the public as we go through it? Can we be creative? Can we push for things like 15 or 30-minute some parking spots outside or close to there? I think we should push for that. I also think we might want to look at other things, because we talked about elderly folks or folks who are older. One of the ideas they came up with was, well, I make it downtown for church, or I make it downtown to Ithaca for synagogue. Would we look at being creative and having a couple hours open right after those people are coming down to Wegmans or shopping or for the religious services, to have a couple of hours open for certain things, or be able to do some things more in the community. So I think we should be open, to doing that, but to have centralized places where they know, because it's really hard to tell people, you go from here, you go to there, no, that's around the corner, and then they're just like, well, kind of forget it. So I think this is a compromise, which I think we're getting close, I think, to something that's pretty darn good, and then we should be flexible as we go along and hear a lot of feedback from the community.
Veronica?
I agree the wayfinding is super important. And I would love to see, through this project, if we can also add more wayfinding for buildings that we're not changing. For instance, I routinely see people sort of looking around in the parking lot near this building, don't know where the legislature chambers are, because it's not well labeled at all. The thing I forgot to say about the parking stuff is also that not everyone has a car or can drive, which I'm sure we all know, but sometimes we talk as though we don't know that. If we're talking about accessibility, requiring someone to both possess a car, which are expensive, and I only have the car I have because my parents bought it for me, because I am lucky to have those resources. I do not have the income necessarily to have just bought my car outright. The having the car and then being able to maintain it and being able to drive it, physically ability-wise. There are just a million reasons why someone might not be able to drive, let alone just choosing not to. And so if we were to turn to, well, let's have it be easy to drive and park here, and we don't look at other transportation options, that is going to cut out quite a lot of people from being able to come to our building and to be able to work for the county. And it's not like our jobs are full up with people knocking down our doors to work here, at least across the board.
Thank you, Veronica. Susan?
Practically speaking, all of the parking issues that we're talking about already exist for downtown. And as we go through this process, it seems like maybe I've listened to everybody, and have been at least 6 or 7 solutions. So maybe we just need to create an inventory of all the options and not go down the rabbit hole of making the parking drive the project, but to always keep it in mind. And I know that several years ago, there was this big initiative to make Ithaca a walkable city. I know lots of sidewalks have been put in. There's a lot more bikes. There's, we now have the ride share cars again. So there are all these opportunities, and I think we have to keep them in mind, but I don't think we can let it drive the project. And I worry that we focus on that sometimes too much for the facility. So I don't know if we have like 2 or 3 people whose maybe their task is the parking inventory. And I do think it's important, but I don't think it can drive, because people have to, I will say I heard parking complaints. The most often heard complaint when I was director of the library was parking. But part of that was also the parking meters, because you had the first hour free in the garages and all of that. So anyway, I just don't want it to drive the discussion. I think it's essential, it's important. I've heard from all kinds of agencies too, their concern. So I think we have to keep it in mind, but we can't let it be the deciding factor.
Okay, Rich, and then we'll end it after that.
Yeah, I agree with what Susan just said and others. We do have a situation kitty corner from our site where the city has agreed to 10-minute parking that serves the town of Ithaca and the post office. I think we could learn quite a bit there, because it seems highly functional for people getting in and out. If we were to do something similar on that corner, I think we could address a lot of what we just talked about. And in the meantime, it might make sense to go talk to the town of Ithaca and the post office to just do that, and maybe have somebody sit outside and see how long are those cars really there. Do a sort of dirty study to determine, are people parking there for the day in the 10-minute parking, or are they really getting in and out? And if it's working, it could probably work for us too. Thanks.
Lisa?
Something else that I wanted to bring to this committee's attention, and it doesn't have to be anything we go into greater depth today about, but to put a pin in for a future meeting. Staff meets monthly about the safety and security of county buildings and county office spaces. And with the center of government, with 14 county offices under one roof, it's an opportunity in that consolidation to look at and plan for the security of the building as we go, and a way of making it so that the building is both secure and welcoming, and to strike that balance. I think would be an important thing to consider, as well as either having a consolidated reception, or whoever is on the first floor of the building would be taking that reception function. So for future consideration.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, Megan?
And I'll just note, just kind of more from the planning research side, that because I recognize that employee parking is also tied in with our visitor parking, that, the research to date, kind of indicates that the time that you can have the greatest impact on your employee commute is either when the individual employee moves their home or that individual employee's office space moves, when there's a disruption either at the work end or the home end of things. So if that becomes of interest, thinking about, how, kind of how we are working with our staff in terms of the benefits that, we offer in terms of parking and things. I recognize, we have a really diverse county, and some people want to live in further out areas. Other people might be interested in putting more of their transportation costs towards their housing costs and aren't as interested in driving, so that our staff are diverse as well as our community members. And so that might be something to think about, just how these things mesh together.
Okay, a lot of good discussion. Thanks for commenting that. I agree with that, Lisa. But accessibility is key to everybody, and we'll have to talk about that as we design things, and we'll go from there. We're going to move on to the request for qualifications. Rel, do you guys want to come on up?
Wait, Deborah's got her hand up.
Oh, Deborah.
Never mind.
Why don't you guys come up, Rel? Table's yours.
Okay, before that, actually, if I could introduce first the gentleman to my left. This is Christian Vasui, so he's the new project manager in our department. And so that's my update. He started yesterday, so he's very fresh, and we've brought him up to speed a little bit on this project, the RFQ. The RFQ is hopefully will be posted Friday. It's done on our end. It's being reviewed internally. I held off a little bit just to make sure that Christian was on board before we put it out there, but it's a voluminous document, longer than the one you saw before. We've inserted a lot of forms that finance wanted included, but it will be out. My expectation is by mid-June that we will receive responses and then schedule interviews later in the month, which goes well with the schedule. Terry Carroll that spoke at the last committee meeting about doing the Flex Tech study to look at district geothermal, I think will go well as far as timing when we get that design report and when we can pick up with start with the schematic design with our consultants. So the discussion earlier regarding historic preservation is, I'm well aware of that, and that's a key requirement in the consultants that we're seeking for, that they have experience in working with all of the groups, not only locally, but state as well as federal. So I'm not concerned at all that we will be able to propose something that will match very well in this block. So I'm not concerned at all. I've been involved in other projects where we've had to be cognizant of that. But Christian has worked in the city before, briefly for the here at the City of Ithaca, but he comes most recently from working in New York City, and really likes being in this community. So that's all I have on the RFQ and on our project manager, if you have any specific questions on either.
Mike?
I'm sorry, I didn't get Christian's last name.
Oh, Vasui.
Can you spell it for me?
V-A-S-U-I.
Thank you. The other question I had, when we did the RFQs for the old library, we had actual presentations by the groups, and I would like to see that again and like to be able to hear those presentations.
And that is the plan.
Okay,
Great.
So maybe you could explain how that process is working. Let's say you get a dozen qualification things. Would you vet any of them first, and then bring
Yes.
the groups you propose?
Yes, in the RFQ, there is and I did go over it a couple of months ago, there's a selection kind of review process, and so we've requested that all the submittals now are online, electronic, but we've also requested they present or submit at least 5 days after the deadline 10 copies of, hardbound copies of their submittal that we would distribute to committee members. But also, I know that Lisa indicated that there's going to be a team, a subset of this group that will be involved in the interview process. And so initially, we review the submittals and then basically get to a short list. Hopefully 3 of those that are submitted that we would then call in for interviews. And then they have an hour to basically present their approach to the project and introduce the project team, the principals in the organization, but also the project team members that will be working directly with this committee and staff. And then from that, we would then select who we would want to negotiate with. This is a request for qualification, so it's not a request for proposal, so we're not going to see any numbers initially. We're basically want to select a team that we work with, one that has the qualifications, especially, as you've heard earlier this morning, regarding designing historic districts and all of that, and also sustainability, all the other requirements that we included in the scope of services. And then from that, if we select one firm that we want to deal with, and it could be a team, a firm that, but it has a team of, could be landscape architects, engineers, energy engineers, such, and then we would then negotiate fees with that firm. And if they're agreeable, as far as that we feel that those fees are reasonable, then we would then enter into a contract with that firm. If not, then we would go to the next consultant. We would rank the consultants 1, 2, 3. We'd go to the next one and do the same thing. We've never had to go to the second. We've always been able to negotiate with the top consulting firm that we've selected. And so once we negotiate the fees, we enter into an agreement, and then basically we start to work.
Are people comfortable with that? Annie, go ahead.
Just wondering who's on that team or interview committee?
I had asked Randy to recommend or to think about that, because it is going to be a time commitment.
Yeah, anybody interested, just let me know.
So just wondering too also, so what's going to, do we have an idea of who's going to, is it going to be a couple of legislators, people from facilities, planning, our equity office, administration? Just wondering, do we have an idea yet of the makeup versus, I mean, I appreciate saying who wants to be on it, but do we have an idea of what we want to be that makeup,
I mean,
ideally?
Aside from committee members, staff-wise, it would be myself, it would be our project manager, it would be county administration representative, planning and sustainability representative, either Terry or Katie as well on the staff side. The legislators, I think we were seeking for 2 to 3.
I was thinking 3, but that's my thought. Does that sound okay, or?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, are we, as far as, yeah, we don't, I guess, as far as like accessibility or diversity and inclusion issues, do we, so I presume, you know, you folks at facilities know a lot about accessibility. Do we want to make sure that there's some inclusion? We had some issues, you know, a couple of years back when we started talking to contractor or developers that they didn't know anything about inclusion, diversity, in that type of way, and how you would make the building accessible and make, so I'm just want to make sure, is it possible? I don't know, it's a time commitment. Is there some, could our equity officer participate in that?
Sure.
Yeah, definitely. Charlene actually reviewed the RFQ several weeks ago.
Right.
And we inserted quite a bit of language that she recommended in that. So on the accessibility part, on the technical side, I'm well versed in that.
You know,
but
right.
as far as her area, we would welcome her involvement.
Great, because it's easier to do that from the beginning versus trying to add that in later. Okay, great, thank you. I'm pleased with that.
Greg?
Just a quick question, and this is just my curiosity. Fees on this type of project for architecture, design, engineering, et cetera, are a percentage of total project cost?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, that's a starting point, and that's during the negotiations, and it really depends on what we want to include as far as services. And so some of the services that we're including are not typical. And so I don't always like percentage. So I will basically go, okay, we'd like these things. What is that going to cost? What are the, what time commitment is required? But yeah, typically it is a percentage, and usually on the front side, as far as budget, you start at a percentage.
Yeah, I've always struggled with that, right? Because the more your money that they spend, sometimes the more that they can make, right? So it's not, you're not on the same playing field.
Right.
Right, so I'd rather incentivize for cost savings rather than overruns.
Right.
So as long as we can keep that in mind or have those conversations on, how they truly partner from a financial standpoint, it should be mutually beneficial and not just work in their favor when we overspend.
Exactly, and that's why, as I said, we're negotiating it. If we decide that it's not reasonable, then we walk away.
Sure.
And sometimes as we're walking away, they reconsider and give us a better number.
Great. All right, cool. Thank you.
Arel, you heard the comment about the bank building and building it into design. What are your general thoughts on that?
I think it's preliminary. I mean, it's true that it is a solid building on the interior. I mean, the outside skeleton is not. I mean, that would be easy to remove. It has 2 stair towers or concrete, but that can come down. It's going to take a little work, but I'm not concerned about it. I think really to reuse some of it, that is more challenging, and it really depends on the design. I'm not seeing a building that is going to be right up against the sidewalk. And so that's the only way that you could use a lot of what's there, but I'm not saying that it's not possible. So I think I'm an engineer, not an architect, and so we'll leave that for them to look at and analyze. So I'm not saying no, I'm just saying it would be challenging to do so.
Mike?
We ran into a similar discussion with the old library when some of the proposed developers were talking about, well, what we would do is use the old foundations, and that would save all this carbon as opposed to new concrete. I don't know how much ended up being reused, if any, over there. But it was an interesting argument, but I'm glad we didn't end up using that as a deciding factor.
Right, and then the thing is that even if the foundations could be reused, it's a 2-story building. If we're building a 5-story, structurally it's not. And so you're spending a lot of money to either beef it up. It's easier just to remove that. And if I were an engineer and had to put my stamp on it, I would not work off of an existing that is, it's not clear and unknown how it was designed. And I don't think we have drawings for that building. I think they indicated they have drawings for the professional that I did not know they had, so that would be nice to get a copy of those for the professional building.
Right.
Quick question. With what we did on the dentist building, I can't remember the number now, we ground the concrete block and crushed it in place, and that's structural fill?
Yeah.
So does that keep the embodied carbon definition by, even if we grind it up and we use it as fill, we're not taking new rock and trucking new rock into, or agri whatever material. So I think we need to make sure we're creative and talk about how we're fully utilizing things, because that carbon really is still in place, and it served a purpose where we'd have to take something else out of the ground and truck it in to fill that void.
Exactly, and we would explore all of that.
Yeah, so I think we need to think bigger about, and again, I don't know the definition, Terry, so I would look to you to find but to me, as a layperson in that field, it seems like it would make sense that you're not just throwing it away, you're utilizing it, and that's the intended use. You're not pouring new concrete, you're not mining new stone, you're not, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay.
Well, Chris, you like to go by Chris or Christian? Christian, anyway. Okay, not to put you on the spot, but you welcome. We're glad to have you, definitely needed a lot going on in facilities. But do you want to make a quick comment or anything, or just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I learned a lot about the discussion with the historic preservation, and I think based on discussion, a compromise could be reached if the building, the existing building, it's structurally sound and of course has to be inspected. And I think we can accommodate both, depending on the amount of money. Even parking, it can be done underground, but it's costly. So I'm optimistic a compromise could be reached with everything, including historic preservation and parking. But money, it's #1 issue, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. You're here on the ground floor of this whole project, so
Exactly.
It's only taken 4 years to get here, right? So, but we're moving forward. Yes, Lori?
I just want to make a note that the timeline of having it posted by Friday is a little aggressive. We just received it. So we will absolutely do our best. We typically ask for 2 weeks to go through finance and 2 weeks to go through a county attorney and compliance, and we have 4 days. So we will do our best, but it is a little aggressive to have it posted by Friday.
But hopefully if you can get it posted by the end of the month, then we could be looking at these for our July meeting maybe. Because we missed the June meeting anyway, so I think that's fine. Mike?
I'm sitting here thinking, I don't think we should limit the review committee to 3 legislators. I think if more legislators want to be a part of that, they ought to be allowed.
I have no problem with that. Lisa?
The question is, will it constitute a quorum? If so, then it will be, it will need to be a public meeting. That's.
What would that take? Would that take 4 people from this committee? Because there's 7 people in this committee, so what is a quorum? Oh, is there 8? Okay.
5, right?
So what's the, I'm looking at Jordan, and I'm not sure she knows the answer to that, but maybe we'll look into that. We'll find out what quorum is. Right.
Yeah, a quorum's 5, right?
Do you have your,
If it's a quorum of this committee, or if it's a quorum of the whole legislature? That's what I'm saying.
A quorum of, I think, any body that could be making decisions on the topic being discussed. So if it's RFQs for the, regarding to the center of government, then this committee can make decisions about the center of government. A quorum of that would not be okay. But a quorum of like the Health and Human Services Committee is probably fine.
Right. I look at this as almost the entire legislature voting on this particular person. So maybe so we'll talk about that, how that works. Maybe we're recommending, and then the full legislature would vote, I think, on who we're going to choose, because I think it's that important. But anyway.
Yes.
so do we have our, if we're getting applications coming in soon for the RFQs, then do we need to establish those legislators today?
We're easily 5-6 weeks out.
No,
So we can do it.
We're 5-6 weeks out, so we could do that at next month then. Okay, just want to make sure we're not holding things up.
But we'll find.
You know, not that legislators ever would hold things up, but just want to make sure.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions or comments or concerns? Seeing and hearing none, we're adjourned.
Minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize for that. We're not adjourned. So can I get a motion to approve the minutes from April 9th, 2024? Greg, second by Veronica. Do we have to do a roll call for that?
Sorry.
Let's do a roll call. That's okay.
Randy Brown,
Yes.
Susan Curry,
Yes.
Deborah Dawson,
Yes.
Rich John,
Yes.
Michael Lane,
Yes.
Greg Menzie,
Yes.
Veronica Pillar,
Yes.
Ann Corman.
Yes.
Thank you. We're adjourned.